Welcome to Alive to Thrive here on KNSJ 89.1 FM. Here on Alive to Thrive, we believe we're not on this earth merely to survive, we're alive to thrive. We're honored today to have on our guest, Nancy. And Nancy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Mitchell, and hello to your audience. I'm Nancy Gannon Hornberger, and I'm at Say San Diego serving as the Chief Executive Officer, part of a team. You know, we have 300 plus employees, so my job here is to make sure that they have all the resources and support that they need and to provide leadership in the community. So this is a great opportunity. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And with all the work that you guys are doing, and like you said, it's part of a team, but with all the work in all the different areas, I imagine you're helping so many people in the community. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show and talk about the different resources that you're providing and the people that you're helping.
Sure, great. Would you like me to give an overview of the organization?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay, excellent. So Say San Diego stands for Social Advocates for Youth. And I just want to focus on that concept for a minute of being a social advocate, because we really see our work as being done in partnership with the people that we engage and serve, as you will, if you will, as a nonprofit. So we work in partnership in the sense that we, maximize their ideas, their voice. We work collaboratively. We really want our program participants to feel empowered. And because Say San Diego has been around for quite a while, for more than 50 years, we have been able to develop a comprehensive footprint. And so there's three big areas where we work. One is child and youth development. And there for more than 30 years, we've been providing support to families, working families, or any family for that matter, who needs a safe, nurturing, and enriching place for their child to be before and after school, and also in terms of infant care and preschool. And our big innovation in that space is that we developed a model workplace childcare center at one of our office sites to serve our employees in the community. And we wanted to say, hey, if we can do it as a nonprofit, other employers take note. We'll help you set up workplace childcare. And this is really in response to an urgent need. There's an extreme lack of high quality, affordable childcare options. So that's one bucket of work. And I'm happy to talk about all of it, but just to kind of give you a quick overview. Another big area of work is in community engagement. And I spoke early on about working in partnership. We really know that there's positive and also negative community conditions that affect people's lives. So it's very important that in communities, people feel that they have a partner, support, resources, and a voice to advocate for change. So we work with young people and residents in particular communities. So for instance, with military connected families, with refugee and asylee families, with families that are experiencing economic hardships, so that their needs and interests and creative ideas are understood by government. So that community organizing and community engagement is very place-based, and it's based on the principle that those of us who are most effective have the best ideas about solutions. So that's that area of work. And then we do clinical and well-being services. So, this is kind of where we started. We would envision a world where no young person or adult would ever have to become involved in the justice system or the child welfare system. We understand that there's reasons for that. And so we work on delinquency prevention, family strengthening, whole family wellness. Again, really standing alongside our clients, seeing them as a solution to the hardships and problems that they face. So it's very different from a traditional kind of blame and shame model. And we've been doing that work for a long time. most recently in this area of work, we expanded a Dad's Core program, which is really about helping dads who often feel disengaged, especially if they're coming back from incarceration or coming back from military service, or they're sharing custody with another parent. We really want them to feel that they have not just our support, but peer support to be the best they want to be as parents, providers, and partners. And additionally, we established a wellness center to expand mental health and substance abuse prevention and treatment services, because there's a big gap between treatment need and what's available. So those are just to kind of give you a sense. So these 3 areas of work have been, kind of the wheels of our bus for a long time. Child and youth development, youth, adult, and family wellness, and community engagement.
That is phenomenal. And I love that concept of the people that would know what is best to be able to kind of make that bridge in between the government and finding those resources and like really intertwining that. So when working with these families, what strategies do you use to help strengthen the family unit?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to have a wide lens when working with families. My own family of origin had struggles, so I think, like me, many of our team members, many of the people in my workforce here, have that great empathy because of experience, lived experience. But even if folks come in without lived experience, what we're really looking for is almost a philosophical orientation, right? That we need to really fully understand how people got to where they are. So just to give you a couple of examples, if we get a referral from Child Welfare Services for a family where they're facing a charge of neglect, right? So child welfare intervening as it's required to do by law first calls us after they've done their investigation to see if there's supportive and preventive services that can be brought forward with that family to alleviate the problem that they've identified. So, so for instance, one of the things we often see is that kids are being left alone. A neighbor will call into the child welfare hotline and said, these kids, they're always alone into the night. I don't know if they're being fed. I don't know if anyone's paying any attention to them. It looks chaotic. It's noisy. Very, very sort of classic example of somebody calling the child welfare hotline. So our part in that is, sadly, these parents are now compelled to meet with us, but we want to meet with them on their terms and ask them, so what's going on? Why are your children alone? Are you aware that people in the neighborhood are concerned? Kind of get them to think about safety risks, especially if they have very young children that are home alone for long hours, what the potential safety problems are. And often you find that it's poverty, which is the underlying problem. So these folks are just scraping together any bits of income or employment that they can possibly pull together. Maybe a single parent, maybe a couple, maybe several adults raising their children together. Here in San Diego, it is very hard, to raise a family. So our philosophy here, just to kind of cap this off, because I could obviously talk for a long time, is that raising children, right, and growing up for that matter, are very complicated, even in the best of circumstances. When you might have abundant resources like great schools and a safe neighborhood and employment that pays a living wage where you can support your family. But when those things are not in place, the neighborhood's dangerous, or you're alone and isolated, or you don't have the employment that you need, or you have a special needs child, or are having trouble with family communication, all of those things can create vulnerabilities that, if not addressed, get worse and worse. And then the next thing you know, that family might end up in the child welfare system. Now, in fact, children who are severely abused are fairly small in number. And so we do take that seriously too, of course. If we get a finding where there's potential physical or sexual abuse, we will work on a different kind of intervention. But 75, 80%, maybe better, of the families that are struggling to keep their families together are dealing with other issues, parental substance abuse that can be treated, health problems, chronic health problems sometimes that make it hard for them to move around or take care of their kids, low income, poverty, and not being able to feed their kids or clothe them or make sure that they get dental care. So, that's a key thing we see a lot too. The child is sick or has a need like dental care that the family can't take care of. We can help them sign up for health care, make sure that they have a health home, make sure that they have a relationship with a health provider, make sure their kids are going in, partner with them to help make that happen. So this is a lot of what we do. And, we try to intervene before that point that we would get a call from child welfare. We have early parenting support programs that start before the baby is born to work with parents on positive parenting. How do you communicate with your kids? How do you enrich their language development? How do you set up your home so it's safe from hazards and potential injury for your child? How do you make sure that the child's nutrition is on point? And then if you have a special needs child, it's even more complicated. So we're ready to help with all of those questions. I often think that every parent in the United States should have a parent coach, and that's a lot of what we do, is coaching. And it's successful. It's what everyone really needs. We need someone who's interested, involved, bringing resources, helping us to understand our child's development. Most parents really want to be good parents. And obviously, if there's bigger issues like incarceration or drug treatment, foster care might have to occur, but then we want to help reunify those families too. Similarly, Mitchell, we do foster family support, all kinds of activities around that kind of, to make sure that if kids are in foster care, that works well, because unstable or disrupted, they call them disrupted placements, are common in foster care, unfortunately, which just creates ongoing chaos for everybody. If a child, is placed and then that placement doesn't work and then they're placed again. So we do support for foster families also to make that work. But even before it gets to this crisis point, we're really looking at, what do families need? They need public transportation. They need healthy food resources. They need childcare. Sometimes they need emergency financial relief. We help with all of these things.
I think that is so incredible. And some of those points that you touched on are so essential, is that there's preventative work. There's this work done in advance to help the parent before before the child's born, to help give them the tools and the guidelines of how to walk them through that process. And I think it's so amazing that you have it established so that whatever part or whatever stage that the family's in, that you have the resources there to be able
That's
to.
really our dream and our hope. The funding for nonprofits can be tricky, but that really is what we would call a continuum of care, right? So you're looking at responses that are really keyed to what the family and child needs at, whatever their status may be. And we have families that are, I would say, many of our families, probably 75% or so, are struggling economically. But then in that 25%, we have people who, if you ask them, they would say, oh, I'm solidly middle class, or money is not really an issue for me. But they also need help, right? So we want to be able to have those differential, sensitive responses to families, whatever it is that they need. So thinking about a mother who came recently and said, every time I ask my child to get off of the computer and stop gaming, this kiddo just loses it. Like, he's going on preteen years and has like a physical reaction, like a tantrum reaction, right? Every time. And so, her impulse is like, I should never allow this kid anywhere near a computer or a gaming device, right? Kind of reasonable, if my child is behaving that way, I might feel the same way. So she called us to find out if could we help, could we do some thinking it through with her reactions, how she can communicate, what kinds of structure and guidelines she can put down to prevent these outbursts, and also then with her child so that they could be on the same page and really understand that she doesn't want to have to take that away altogether, but the behavior is not appropriate, acceptable, productive, safe. And, she knows that her child can do better. And so that's where they're headed now. So just to give you that example, like this is a family that I think would say, oh, we're never going to be identified by child welfare or, as being in poverty, but, we have these needs too. So we really want to stand in that space and recognize that people need that differential supportive response.
Absolutely. I just want to remind our listeners you're listening to KNSJ 89.1 FM. This is Alive to Thrive. I'm your host, Mitchell Murphy. We have the honor today of meeting with Nancy Gannon Hornberger. She's the president and CEO of Social Advocates for Youth, or SAY, San Diego. And to touch back on the point that you just stated, that is a huge thing nowadays with gaming and with Facebook and social media, because of the dopamine response from our brains, especially in the youth. They are actually addicted to these devices based off of the dopamine that's released. And a lot of the games and social media is actually made that way to create that dopamine response. And so that's part of the reason why he's having this physical reaction.
Exactly.
This tantrum. And so in that instance, what counseling, what advice, I'm sure there's a lot of our listeners that are in similar situations. What would be your advice in the counsel of how to work that? Should they put a limit on time of tech time and say, well, you're allowed to use the computer for this amount of time after you've accomplished your homework and your chores and use it as a reward? Or what counsel and advice would you give in a situation like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a practical matter to put, kind of limits and parameters is always good parenting, right? And especially if it's done lovingly and supportively. In this situation, because it's gone so far down the road too, I think it's really important that the parents and the child understand exactly what you were talking about, that there is something called gaming addiction, and that is a physiological response. And that for that child, in some ways, that might be as dangerous as using a substance. And then help the family to have that dialogue, right? Because if it just sort of comes in from, got to do your homework first, got to, there's sort of just tension there, right? Like rules versus breaking rules. But what we really want to do is create dialogue and common understanding between the parent and the child. Children, at 6, 7, 8, 10, certainly in their teen years, are capable of understanding. And so the orientation here too is also to help the young person. You said it at, kind of in the beginning of the intro of the broadcast, to thrive, to understand what that means, and to thrive with gaming, and to maybe come forward himself and after learning and talking and thinking about his reactions and even recording them with his mom, like what is going on, and reflecting on his own behavior to say, oh, hey, yeah, I do want to change. I mean, that's the key. Anyone will change if self-motivated, right? It's much harder to change if it's just rules. Rules from the most loving parent are not as good as support and guidance from that loving parent and a child realizing, oh, there's a reason why I need to change my behavior. There's a reason why I need to limit my time in gaming. So it's a little different approach, and it takes, I think parents listening will realize that these things take time. This child obviously didn't get into this circumstance overnight. It might take a few times. And so it's also allowing for mistakes to be made. So I think about like mental health changes or changes in, in any kind of arena, whether it's substance abuse treatment or healthcare or mental health care. We have to allow people to take steps forward, but when they take a step back, this child or anyone for that matter, to then reflect on that and try again. Many, many chances to succeed. And with some kids, like rewards for success are very helpful, but ultimately you want to get to the intrinsic reward of this child realizing, oh, I can be healthy and do gaming,
I
and
love that.
be good at that, be
Yeah,
good at that balance.
absolutely. I love that. And it comes down to communication and education, right?
And a
And so,
lot of like, let's try this again. Let's rehearse this. Let's, so for instance, doing scenario planning, in all of our lives is helpful, right? I think about like when people are, planning a project or painting a part of their house, they do a lot of planning before they actually do it. And that's really part of good counseling is thinking about like, okay, when this happens again, how do you want this to go differently to the child? What can you do? And kids are so smart, they'll say, I mean, I'm not in the session with this child, but, I can imagine a child saying, oh, I need to walk away, or I need you to stop talking to me, mom, while I'm separating from my gaming and just like run around the yard for a few minutes or go out and sit in the front of the house for a few minutes to cool down so that I don't have a tantrum. Like they know what they need. So I think then allowing for that and supporting those positive steps becomes really important. So, there's a lot there. Vaping obviously is another big issue that, kids are getting a hold of those vaping devices. And we work with that on the individual level that I'm describing, but we've also been part of the larger campaign to eliminate flavors. Peppermint and bubble gum. These are not flavors that are meant to really appeal to adults. Maybe peppermint, but not so much bubble gum. Um, the names of vaping devices, the way that they're made to look like a thumb drive. This is all predatory industry practice. And so as we're also working on individual level counseling with families, we're also creating awareness among young people so that they can go and talk to the city council and state legislators about changing these predatory marketing conditions. And then we petition the legislators ourselves as an organization in coalition with others to change practices. So just to kind of give you a sense, when we talk about, individual, family, and community, and reducing harm at all levels, we're very serious about that policy and practice change level and advocating for better systems and community conditions.
I think that's wonderful because it really is predatory. And I've noticed that more and more of certain predatory companies are going after the youth because in their mind, if they can get someone addicted to a substance at a young age, that's the long haul of that customer essentially. I mean, and it's the same way with sex trafficking. They target younger girls because if they can manipulate and get and change their mindset, then that's the longer extended use that they're going to get out of them as to be able to take advantage of that situation. But what steps
trafficking is another good example where, of course, we want to work with the family on a safety plan if their child's at risk. We want to work with children before they're at risk to understand signs, signals, prevention, as well as parents and community partners, so that they really understand what's happening with sex trafficking locally, which is a very large problem in San Diego. And then also to really think about, how do we work with law enforcement? How do we work with policymakers to better interdict and intervene and protect communities? So again, multi-level interventions are our approach.
That's the smartest way to do it. And really, I love the way that you're working with all the different, from all these different aspects together and recognizing that everything's intertwined, because it really is. And the work that I did in San Diego with a few different groups, I worked with Grace. It's Girls Rising Above Child Exploitation.
Oh, yeah, good.
So you've heard of Grace.
Yes.
Yeah. When the pandemic first kicked off, I volunteered and would help gather up the art supplies and put together the art kits, because they would
Oh,
do
very nice.
kits together virtually. And
Yeah.
so I'm very good friends with the executive director at the time, Desiree Holdaway. And so it's amazing what a difference it makes to have a sense of community for these girls.
Yes.
And to have those connections and to realize that they're not alone. And I think that that was a big part of the education piece that I wanted to get involved. And I actually had Grace on my show, is because they, as a whole, the community needs to be educated at what a huge problem it is in San Diego and in this nation, because they see these movies like Taken and they think that it's something that just happens overseas, but it's right in our backyard.
Yeah.
And it starts out with men going to these younger girls and manipulating them as, oh, you're my girlfriend and I'm going to flaunt you with gifts and spoil you. And it's this very manipulative process leading them down this road that their only worth and their value is from the sexuality of their body. And by giving that up, they can get all of these material things that they want. And so it's harder to get them out of that lifestyle, because they think, well, I sacrificed my morality but look at all the things that I can get from it, And so I think it's like breaking that, reestablishing a sense of worth is really important. What are your
Very much
thoughts on
so. Yeah. And San Diego's also really been a leader in rethinking and reframing that whole area. So, Mitchell, I've been in this work for such a long time, and I remember when girls who were, exploited in sex trafficking were considered to be perpetrators, essentially, words like prostitutes or streetwalkers or, that kind of thing, right? And then, they're underage, and even if they're, young women in their early 20s, the whole framework has changed to really think about girls, women, and young men and boys as being sexually exploited youth, which is a huge, not just verbal and sort of narrative shift, but it's been a huge policy shift in the way that we've really been thinking about, safe harbor, helping young girls, helping them to be protected and set their lives back on track, and not getting them involved with the justice system as perpetrators of a crime. And that's a big, people often hear, and I am concerned as well, about the social ills and policy changes that are detrimental in our society. This is something that in my lifetime has really shifted. We still have a very long ways to go, but what it means is that we're really looking at young people who are exploited and abused differently as victims and as suffering and as having harm done to them, rather than as perpetrators of a crime. And that's been huge. So I just want to kind of note that, because that's been a big shift, and San Diego's been part of leading in that area.
Yeah, I think that that's another aspect is realizing that there are so many groups and there's so many people out there who care that want to help these girls. And
Yeah,
that
yeah,
they just need to be aware that there are groups of people that care and that there
yeah,
is help out there, because I think a lot of them feel isolated and alone and feel like they can't get out of it on their own.
yeah,
But really, there are so many people out there that love and care and want to make sure that they have the best life that they possibly can.
yes, absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah, and so getting that's part of the reason why I bring up these topics on the show, is to let so that people can get the word out there that there are groups out there that can help. I just want to remind our listeners you're listening to KNSJ 89.1 FM. This is Alive to Thrive. I am your host, Mitchell Murphy. Again, we have the honor of having Nancy Hornberger, the president and CEO, on our show of Safe San Diego. And I just wanted to go a little bit more into this current topic, and then we can show the video clip that we discussed before the show. But while we're discussing this, what are some of the coping mechanisms and coping skills that you're giving the youth into overcoming, say, addiction to vaping or drugs? And my second question is, what is the best way to help the girls that are at risk of being sex trafficked?
okay. So I think one of the things that people often talk about in our field and where Say San Diego has really been a leader is in trauma-informed approaches. And again, this is a shift really in my professional lifetime, which is really significant, to think about not just what is occurring, like what is maybe the presenting behavior that the young people are showing, you know, weapons carrying, getting involved with sex trafficking, getting into fights, acting out in school, but why, not just the what, but why is that occurring and what are the underlying family factors, personal factors, societal factors affecting this child. You know, we know that children who have um, caring adults in their lives, a lot of what you would think of as developmental assets. So, have been raised in a context where they're taught about values and self care, and develop a lot of self esteem and feel that adults, just maybe in their family, of course, but outside of their family, really care for them, who develop personal interests, um, who do well at something, you know, maybe it's school, maybe it's art, maybe it's a sport. Those children tend to thrive, right? And it's like all of those developmental assets inoculate them against many other difficulties. But many kids don't live in that well-resourced environment. And in fact, the environment they live in has adverse conditions, things that are very harmful to them. So, you know, kids who can get um, a weapon or drugs more easily than they can find a tutor, you know, or a place to go for a recreational program. You know, we have many neighborhoods like that. We have neighborhoods that have predatory people, as you talked about earlier, you know, whether they be sex traffickers or drug dealers or people who are just looking to exploit children because they are so vulnerable. And as you said, they can kind of get them early through grooming, through, you know, giving them trinkets or candy or buying them alcohol or, you know, getting that pretty sweater that the girl always wanted and giving it to that child. So part of what we need to do is, again, work on all of those levels. So with kids, it's about being aware, some skill building around what a healthy relationship looks like, what care and concern looks like. Um, Things like, you know, people talk about this, but it's truly important. Behavioral rehearsal around refusal skills and safety and escaping a dangerous situation, about getting help. Um, you know, we can't assume that kids have those skills. Most of them don't. And then at a deeper level, sometimes it's really about healing that trauma, unearthing it through therapy, in a safe context or a restorative healing circle, if not therapy, to really kind of work with them to understand that you are not necessarily your circumstances, right? That you can be more than your circumstances, right? So if children are in an unsafe neighborhood or an unsafe family or relationship, helping them to establish safety. Sometimes that is a whole family intervention. Sometimes that's helping family to move from one setting to another, like just switching the neighborhood. Sometimes it's working with the school. So it is more individualized, but just to kind of, so skill building, trauma healing, looking at life circumstances and safety planning, making sure that we can do our best effort to help children to have constructive and teenagers to have constructive outlets, to be in a positive peer group, and to have caring adults in their lives. They really need that piece. Even teenagers who say they don't really need that piece. Um, so, for instance, a lot of our youth groups are youth led, but the adults that are involved are trusted allies. They're adults that these kids cherish and would go to if ever they had a crisis. And that's really important. You want to have those resources that we want for every child available to kids who have never had that before. So I hope that explains it. It's not purely scientific, but building developmental assets is evidence-based. We know that really does help, as I say, to sort of inoculate kids against a lot of risks. Building up protective factors, sense of safety, sense of how to get help. All of that is an evidence-based approach, and certainly trauma healing and mental health services help a lot if kids are really struggling, with depression and anxiety or extreme anger. They might need something more therapeutic. Restorative practice is also an approach that's researched to work. And when you bring these pieces together, it makes a big difference.
Absolutely. And I think that that's such a key component is understanding the underlying reason for
Yeah.
the actions and not
Yes.
focusing so much on the action themselves, but underlying the underlying issue is
Yeah.
most of the time caused by some past trauma
Yeah.
or something like that. I mean, and I've brought this up before on the show that trauma they found is more directly tied to addiction than food is to diabetes. And so it's untreated trauma that is really leading to the action of substance abuse and unearthing and rising that trauma to the surface and working through it in a
Yeah.
positive, healthy way is really the key component
Yeah.
to changing behaviors alongside with the will and the desire to change in the first place, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you familiar with the pair of ACEs? I assume you might be.
Actually, what is that?
So ACEs, ACES. So Kaiser here locally did a study of adverse childhood experiences and how they are cumulative and affect people over the lifetime. So these adverse childhood experiences are traumatic experiences, loss of a family member, even things like moving frequently, relocation, having to reestablish a peer group can be traumatizing. But there are also more serious things like violence in the community, violence in the home, um, you know, family disruption, living through a natural disaster. All of these things are traumatizing. When they occur in childhood and they're not addressed, which is a very common American reaction. So for instance, something happens, a beloved grandparent dies, and nobody ever talks about it, right? Uh, Somebody goes through an extreme fire, right, event, which are frequent for us here in the West. And their house gets burned to the ground, and this child is maybe 8 or 10 years old, and no one ever really talks about it. Those experiences have a cumulative adverse effect. not just in childhood, but across the lifespan. Um, People who have a high number of these ACEs tend to, you know, have problems with eating and overeating, health problems, substance abuse problems, relationship, employment problems, like not being able to keep a job, not always feeling antsy and anxious, never satisfied, always kind of moving and disrupting relationships, that kind of thing. So when we look at that, it really shows when people talk about a trauma-informed approach, what we're talking about. Um, because many people will have experienced maybe one or a few of those adverse childhood experiences. But, again, it's this cumulative effect that really creates extreme trauma. And then the pair of ACEs also looks at adverse community conditions. So these would be, things where, I mean, there's, all these examples in society of like things like the lead poisoning in Detroit and Flint. But what we're really talking about is the adverse conditions in one's school or one's neighborhood, like feeling like, oh, I can never go out after dark because it's way too dangerous. Or I live in a community as a young girl where there's sex traffickers on the next block, and so I'm never going to go to the park. Or my school is unsafe, or the teachers in my school are disengaged, and therefore it's a negative experience. And then adverse community conditions can be much more extreme, of course, blighted neighborhoods, neighborhoods where there's a lot of, guns and drug activity, neighborhoods that are extremely poor and under-resourced. So again, these all have a cumulative effect. So let's say you'll do better if you don't have any adverse childhood experiences, even if you're living in an adverse community environment, but still struggle, right? And so this is where the trauma-informed approach really looks at these factors of why people are experiencing challenges. So it's kind of lingo, but it's really important. And I think that, when people talk about trauma-informed approaches, sometimes people just hear lingo, like what does that mean? So I just wanted to explain it a little bit. And this study, this work on the pair of ACEs is really important to look into. So perhaps your viewers would like to reference that. And I'm happy to provide some links to good information on that.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. And that
Yeah,
really, it makes so much sense because really everything's interconnected. And
yeah,
it's
yeah,
those personal relationships along with the personal traumas that are happening with
yeah.
the environment that currently happened with. And we carry, there's that saying that emotions buried alive never die. And so
Yes, exactly. Right, right.
they can go through these experiences at a young age, but it carries over with them, and they may not even be truly identifying
In
of
really
why they're
surprising ways. Yeah.
struggling.
There's another a book that's wonderful called The Body Keeps Score, which is just about physical disease conditions and responses that are related to trauma. So, it is all these things about behavior and family life and relationships, but it's also, and whether or not a person feels they can trust the educators and law enforcement and so on in their life because they have good evidence that they can't trust them, which is an adverse condition. Like all of that is hugely relevant. That book, The Body Keeps Score, really also shows that, people are more prone to diabetes, to cancer, to all sorts of adverse health conditions because of trauma. So trauma healing and trauma healing early and often is really important.
Absolutely. And what do you feel like? I know that we've discussed like therapy and things like that, but what do you feel like are the key components to healing trauma, long-term healing and long-term change
Yeah.
uh, from traumatic experiences? What do you do with your youth to help cause these changes?
Yeah, so it does really start early. I mean, in an ideal world, people wouldn't have to wait until they're experiencing a crisis, like, going into substance abuse treatment or jail or, a hospital to get help. I mean, certainly it can be available at that stage, but I think it really is more elemental. It has to do with, again, I sort of said early and often, and I don't mean to be glib at all. I truly mean that. I think if you look at children, their brain is, 90% developed in terms of the structure of the brain and even language by the age of 6. So we really have to think seriously about what are we doing to create that sense of connection, safety, self-efficacy, just contentment. And contentment derives from safety and self-efficacy in very young children, working on the relationships in their lives so that we're minimizing some of these adverse circumstances. But when they do occur, we're, helping people to work through them in a positive way, not to bury the trauma or bury the circumstance, but really try to address it. So all those individual factors, and there's lots of good treatment approaches to help people who are having really serious concerns, whether it be cognitive behavioral therapy, which really helps people to understand the sort of risk and reward dynamic, and how to reduce risk and not always look for reward, to have more of an intrinsic motivation around risk reduction, whether that's, in terms of the criminal justice system, where sometimes it's criminogenic behavior, meaning people who, might like to steal or fight, or if it's some kind of other issue that they're having, they're, maybe have concerns around domestic violence prevention or other serious things. So cognitive behavioral therapy works really well. There's also whole family treatment modalities that we use. And so, functional family therapy, multisystemic therapy, those are based on models of really having a whole family work more functionally together. But while we're working again with individuals and families, we also really want to address, and that's why we partner with the City Council and the Board of Supervisors and the state legislatures and members of Congress. We really want to address the harmful conditions that need to be eliminated or reduced in communities, and then the supportive and favorable conditions that can be improved. I'll give you an example. So we are going to be on and people can come to this if they like, on Saturday, August 6th, holding a full day event, which is kind of the public pinnacle event of some work that we do in southeastern San Diego around Jeremy Henwood Park and that whole area. So we work with faith institutions and youth organizations and a large coalition of nonprofits and law enforcement and city council members. And one of the things we've been able to do with that park, which was known for drug dealing and sex trafficking, and it was basically a place where law enforcement would police, is to reopen the park and reestablish the recreational mission of the park and make sure that the focus is really on creating a neighborhood resource that law enforcement protects rather than just a place where heavy interdiction is going on. It's not easy to do, but that transformative work of partnering that way is really critical to equity and to well-being for all of our neighbors. So every summer we have what we call the Unity Games to kind of celebrate this joint work together, where probation and law enforcement and church leaders and youth leaders and everyone comes out and has a big, softball game and talks and celebrates. But it's really, that's just like the pinnacle event of the hard work that takes place every day. One of the things we do with San Diego Police Department is something called crime-free multi-housing. So most of the housing in neighborhoods like this, where there might be drugs or weapons being sold, are multi-housing sites. So multiple apartments, generally lower income communities, and the residents are, they just barricade themselves in their apartment and they're scared. And so we organize residents and create a bridge between residents and police to work on greater safety. And a lot of times it's simple things like, let's improve the lighting, and let's make sure that everybody knows who to call when. And let's have the officers that work in this community be known to the residents. And let's get the landlords involved in making sure that they don't allow their parking lot to become a place where, sex traffickers hang out, So these kinds of things take a lot of effort to really partner. They're not therapeutic, but of course they are productive community building efforts that reduce risks that then cause harm, that lead people to need therapy. So I don't think we can ever just work on the individual behavior change without looking at the causation and then really addressing some of the issues in communities that lead to trauma and harm that's done to folks, and then cause them to have greater crises, whether they be health or mental health crises. So,
Absolutely. And it's like
yeah,
you need to address the adults that are currently
yeah,
that have children, and then you are working with the youth, which it's so important because they are our future. We
yeah,
need to
yeah,
help lead them in the right direction because they are the future of humanity. And so it's to break that cycle
yeah,
of poverty. And at the beginning of the show, we were discussing about how sometimes parents may be leaving their children at home alone for long extended periods of time because of poverty. It's like the parents are out there working and trying to take care of their kids, and at the same, and because
yeah,
of that, they aren't able to be there for their child. And because of their poverty, they can't afford a babysitter.
yeah,
And so it's like because of these systems
yeah,
of poverty, it makes it more and more difficult. And so I think that going in and fixing the underlying issue and treating and helping guide the future generation in a
yeah.
positive manner is so important for the
Yeah, we
future.
have to make sure that the systems that are designed to serve the public are actually doing that. And that's not to say, I'm not, here to make an indictment against, the police or anyone. Um, we all live in challenging circumstances, and it's through working together and creating a consensus about public safety and community safety, and really being allies with the residents to lift their ideas and their voices, that things change. Um, and also pointing out things, Mitchell, like, while they're repaving the sidewalks and the streets over and over again, every couple of years in some parts of San Diego, people are turning a blind eye and not paying attention to sex and drug trafficking in a public park and other neighborhoods. And that's an equity issue. Like, that should not be happening. So we're there to stand witness and to stand with community residents and the police and city council and create that change, so that it's um, possible that every child has a park to play in, things like that. I mean, it's just one example, but
I think that's
it's
absolutely amazing.
possible that everybody has healthy food sources in their local market, fresh produce and available. It's possible that if you use SNAP benefits, or what might be commonly called food stamps, that you can double them up and buy things at the farmer's market. Like, those are the kinds of things we work on in addition to the individual behavior change. Get bus passes for kids so that they can not just get to school on time, but maybe go to school and a recreational activity after school, those kinds of things, that they're not just left, having the disadvantage of not having a car or a bicycle or transportation. So, or not being able to afford that public transit.
Yeah.
So that's what I wanted to convey. It's sort of both and. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Well, and that finding that's I read studies about that's when kids start to get into trouble the most is when they don't have anything to do right after school.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Their parents are
Yeah.
still at work, and there's that 2 or 3 hour gap where if there aren't like after school programs or things put in place or a safe park for them to go play in or something that they can do that's positive, a sport that they can be involved with, etc., that's when they start getting let off into getting into trouble and maybe trying drugs for the first time or
Yeah.
being approached by a
Quite
sexual.
possibly. Yeah. Or being approached by someone who they really don't want to be around because, they walk that road every day and someone's watching them. Yeah, I mentioned something called developmental assets, and those are a well-researched set of assets or strengths that can be brought forward in the lives of children that make a tremendous difference. And there's individual, like understanding your own personal ethics and being kind and in positive relationships and having positive sense of self. There's family level assets that have to do with how families function and support each other and their children. um, and it's simple things like we hear little bits of this, like, oh, family dinner matters or talking with your kids matter. Well, it's all of that. So these family assets really talk about or highlight in research the things that are important for parents and family members to do. And then there's community assets, and that's also what we're talking about here, like making sure that there's proactive, pro-social resources available for every kid. Like what most parents want is, I'd love to, maximize my child's interests, whether they want to do a sport or be in theater or dance, or they have artistic tendencies, or they really like, digital media. Like there's so many things that parents of means can access for their kids, but all kids should have those, even if they don't have, a lot of money on hand. So those are the kinds of things we work on in the community.
I think that's so incredible. And I know I mentioned to our viewers we're going to show a video. I'm going to include
Oh
that
yeah,
link.
okay,
I'm
I'm
going to
sorry, we're
include the
running out
link.
of time.
Oh, it's okay. This conversation's been phenomenal. And I would love to have you join me on the show again because
Oh, I'd love
it's
to,
been
yeah.
a phenomenal interview.
And there's also many talented, insightful, wonderful people here at Say San Diego. So I can introduce you to some other staff members too.
I would love that. Absolutely. And I just want to remind our listeners this has been a broadcast by KNSJ 89.1 FM. This is Alive to Thrive. Our guest is Nancy Homberger. She's the president and CEO of Social Advocates for Youth in San Diego, or Say San Diego. And just in the last few minutes of the show, I wanted to talk about you received a commendation from President Bill Clinton. Could you tell our guests a little bit about that in the last few minutes of the show?
Oh, sure. Yes. Thank you. Well, at that time, I was working on gun violence prevention. From a couple different angles. And the specific thing that happened there was I had put together with the American Academy of Pediatrics an injury prevention process for pediatricians and pediatric nurses to counsel families around safety and dangers related to guns in the home. So those would be suicide, firearm injury prevention related to unintentional or accidental shootings, and also, unfortunately, domestic and family and intimate assaults with guns are much more frequent if guns are available in the home. So the idea was that we're going to treat this much like other dangerous consumer products, right? That, if we're concerned about bicycle helmets and putting the, outlet covers on and making sure that furniture can't fall on children, we certainly should be thinking about firearms in the home. So it was a really wonderful partnership, and that recognition was related to the work that I did to make that happen and to have that program spread across the country, in particular to have it picked up by managed care companies and other healthcare providers that could really get the word out to families. So, that's kind of something where I just felt very fortunate, honestly, to be able to exercise my values and do something that was protective and helpful to families. And then I got called into the White House. So I got to meet the president and and receive that recognition. It's very nice.
That is
A
amazing.
great honor in my life. Yeah, thank you for asking.
Absolutely. And I'm so honored that you joined us for the program. And this has been such a delightful conversation and so informative. And I will be in touch with you in the future so that we can.
Excellent. Good. I so enjoyed this. The time went fast.
It
So
did. It really
yeah,
did. Well, and
great
we really,
hosting, Mitchell.
well, and we covered such a variety of different issues. And I feel like you did such a great job of explaining how everything is interconnected. It has been so invaluable. So thank you so much, Nancy, for joining us here today for Live to Thrive. And thank you for our viewers for watching, and stay tuned, and we'll have another show for you coming up next week. All right, thank you,
so
Nancy. Are
much.
there any last thoughts you'd like to share? Would you please announce your upcoming event one more time?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So 2 things. Our website is www.saysandiego.org. Please come and see us. And next week at Jeremy Henwood Park from 9 to 3, we're hosting the Unity Games, which is a community event in southeastern San Diego. You're welcome to come by. I'd love to see anyone there from your viewers and listeners, and say hello. So if you see me, please come over and introduce yourself, and we can continue the conversation. But we just really love working with community partners, with volunteers. So if not next week, we hope to hear from you.
Okay, absolutely wonderful. Well, thank you again, Nancy. I just wanted to make sure we got that announcement out there that it's this weekend so that people were aware of it.
Jeremy Henwood Park, 9 to 3. Thanks so much, Mitchell. And thank you to all of your viewers and listeners.
So thank you, Nancy. Thank you for tuning in to Live to Thrive, and we'll see you next week.